So I know there have been questions about, well, what exactly does that mean? Head count, enrollment. I mean, I see the definition here, but I want an explanation. So that's why we brought in our experts today. So we have two experts with us. We have Ginnie Moran, Executive Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, joined by Lawrence Andriese, Research Analyst, also with the Institutional Research Department. And thank you so much for joining us today. And I believe you have some slides to share, and then we'll have questions and answers. So take it away, Ginnie.
Thanks, Regina. I got to tell you, I'm so impressed with all the resources you've put together to help faculty and the rest of us kind of understand this process. I will say that my approach today has really been more to think about the our approach to program review. And since we are finishing up a comprehensive year, finishing up a huge effort in terms of Ed Master Planning and Strategic Enrollment Management Planning, I really think it's time to kind of take a step back and look at what we're doing and reconsider the context. So when you pose me with the question of what do the metrics mean, my spoiler alert here is that the answer is always it depends, right? Depends on the context. So what I want us to do today is kind of reconsider that context and cast our questions about the data in that context. So my main objective is for us to take a little step back, because I am really hoping that we can come up with some really good ideas about how we can approach next cycle, especially since for the first time in my 15 years as the executive dean, we have really good alignment between an Ed Master Plan, our first strategic enrollment management plan, and a student equity plan that has actually been around for a while, but where all of the student equity activities and goals and objectives are actually embedded in both the EMP and the SEM plan. So that's really what I'm hoping for today. So in taking a step back, if we were to really just sort of conceptualize what our IPR process is now, and again, it's a comprehensive year. The first step is we tell the story, right? We have comprehensive narratives that we fill out where we describe the program mission and we show connection to the EMP. We address any quality questions or compliance questions, particularly those programs that have, in addition to ACCJC, other accreditors or other regulators. Those questions have to be addressed in these narratives. And then a section on summarizing the needs and setting up what you're going to ask for in the program review, right? Then there's a separate section on the data where there are 9 separate indicators where 9 times you guys have to describe the performance and then determine whether or not a goal or some kind of action is needed for 9 separate indicators. Am I foreshadowing? Okay, anyway. And then you've got to create a plan and develop your goals and then ask for any reallocations or augmentations you might need to support those goals. Again, for the comprehensive approach, it tends to be a 3 to 4 year window, I believe, for the most part. So many of you have set up quite a few goals, which is, 5 goals in 5 years is a lot. But I appreciate your ambition. But what I'm hoping to do is create a praise process or an annual planning process that really focuses our intentions maybe a little bit better. So that's kind of the approach, the conceptual model right now. Tell a story, analyze the data, and then you enter into planning. What I'd like us to consider is really kind of simplifying the concepts here, where we tell the story and then we plan. And that story really is about reviewing and evaluating how's our program doing and how are our students doing. Those 2 domains are the most critical parts of what we review when we look at our programs, right? And then that second step really is just how do we now analyze all of this and apply it to being honest about what works, what doesn't work, and then what we need to improve. So that if we just simplify the concepts in this way, we can start to cast the data elements in a far simpler model that makes it easier to interpret and apply what we can conclude from the data and how we apply it to our analysis. So taking this data-informed planning approach in answering the question of how our program is doing, really we're looking at compliance and viability of our program and what the impact on the students is. And then ultimately, as we plan, we're trying to address what needs to improve. So when we look at the domain of compliance and viability, you include some of the basic stuff. What courses are you offering? How many sections? When was the last time you updated your courses? And then how many actual award programs do you have? Just the basics, right? You also look at enrollment trends. I know we've got 6 or 7 different ways of indicating that, but honestly, if you were to take head count, seat count, and FTES, it gives you a picture of what your enrollment trends are. So instead of having three different indicators by 3 different modalities, suddenly you've reduced the concept of enrollment trends to just that. Head count, seat count, FTES across those modalities. And then we're looking at student impact. What does retention look like and success? How many awards are we conferring on a regular basis? And then all of the segmentation by gender, age, and ethnicity through the equity dashboard. So much simpler model, right? We're looking at compliance and viability, and we're looking at what impact we're having on our students. So in drilling in a little bit more into compliance and viability, you're really asking whether or not your basic needs are met. I remember a time, and many of you may, where the library had to ask every year for a budget, or construction didn't have enough for consumable materials every year. So I think we've come a long way from those times, but we still have programs where basic needs are not being met. Needs that support compliance, health and safety, or other resource needs for consumable materials, for example, in a lab. And then in terms of enrollments, now you're just determining whether or not you're seeing at least stable enrollments. Everyone's taken a hit in the last couple of years. The pandemic didn't help. But as you're looking at your own program and you're looking at enrollments, you're really looking at the trend overall and looking at whether or not you have a consistent pattern across particularly gateway courses if you offer them. So you're looking at the pattern of enrollment and looking mostly for stability at least. Where there are big increases or decreases, obviously there's going to be some things you're going to need to do to address that and to determine why and what, if any, additional planning or resource needs are required. Okay, and then when we're looking at student impact, it's are they completing, do we have course success and course retention that is fairly stable across different student groups? And then whether or not, particularly for career technical ed programs, graduates are getting jobs. And I think more and more, although it is not part of our program review, the state certainly requires us to track transfer and that kind of stuff. So it's not part of our program review, but it is something that you'll want to be concerned with. So if we simplify then our approach to program review and just think of the data in terms of compliance and viability and student impact, all we're really doing then as we evaluate it all is developing a plan around the patterns that we see when it comes to compliance and basic needs, student achievement, and whether or not there's alignment with the EMP or the SEM. If you haven't yet taken the time to look at the EMP and the SEM, the blueprints are pretty prescriptive. You all did a great job of working with Marcy to identify some of the things that you would like to move towards. But again, if basic needs and student achievement are not being addressed, it's going to be tough for us to get into the more aspirational stuff out of the EMP. So the plan that you developed based on your analysis of the data should really be about whether or not your conclusion of need is supported by the data. And then whether or not the request that you are, the activity that you're designing and any additional requests you are asking for, how that will actually impact the need. So often we want to ask for more faculty members, right? We had a retirement in psychology, and so I noticed that we have that in our plan, and I'm glad for that. as much as it's going to be hard to replace Patty. Psychology is one of those disciplines that has, gateway courses that's very popular, and it's one of the more popular transfer pipelines to Cal State. So I feel like we need a new faculty member, but whether or not the data support that is another question. And so we'll have some further training on that as we get into our STEM plan. But what we want to do as we put forward a need like a new faculty member, what data do you have to support that need is necessary? And I will posit that the data included right now in the program review doesn't lend itself to making that argument. And so kind of encourage you to not only rethink this approach to program review that I'm recommending here, but certainly that kind of data supporting a faculty hiring need probably should be included. At this point in time, Senate is actually revising their faculty prioritization processes. So some of that stuff is going to be included in there, and hopefully we can integrate that into our program review processes as well once the Faculty Senate has figured that out. Okay, and then the plan should also kind of set out a timeline. So in taking a look at the data that we have now, how it is set up in Nuventive, just as Regina showed you, where there are 9 different data elements and 3 different modalities. 9 times 3 is 27. So that's 27 different clicks that you have to sort of work your way through, even just in the user experience on the system that we're using. But that's an indication of how complex the model is now, and it really doesn't have to be. So really what I'd like us to do as this semester moves forward, and it's something that I've already discussed with Dr. Young, is to really rethink our approach to program review, maybe reevaluate some of the ways that we approach these questions that are core to program review, and start thinking more in terms of program revitalization. So program review to revitalize our program rather than to, what was the other word we used to use? Consolidate, merge, or dissolve, right? Program dissolution. So I'm really hoping that as we rethink our approach to program review, we cast it instead in the framework of revitalizing our program. And that's all I have, Regina.
Thank you for sharing, Ginny. I love that word, revitalization. And that's very, very appropriate for not just program review, but for overall our goals and our mission. A few things that you mentioned. One of the things I didn't talk about too much, but our program reviews phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So phase 2 is the data observations. And then phase 3 is the goals. And you really tied that together nicely with the augmentation and planning for the future. That has to be supported by the data. And obviously, when we're looking at the data, we're observing different characteristics and we're saying, okay, this is not where we want to be. So we need a goal for that. And then you go to phase 3, and that's where you create the goal and you tie that back to the data. So it's all part of one process, and it ties together really nicely.
Yeah, I did notice that it is a nice step that you've added to map the data element back to that. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that if we were to approach this whole process more in terms of viability, in terms of enrollment, then you don't have to revisit 9 different data indicators, or actually, it ends up being 7 of them are related to enrollment. The other 2 are really related to student achievement. But then you can have one statement, one box, one goal, instead of 9 different ones, right? So I am thinking in terms of the user experience as we set up and redesign Nuventive, but it's really also a reflection of a simplified, more mature approach to program review. And frankly, we've worked so hard at program review. We have an exemplary process for program review. I will tell you, Dr. Walden was very impressed with what we've been able to accomplish. So I think it's time to sort of create a more mature approach to it. And then that'll minimize the cumbersome nature right now of the interface. So I'll be honest, I was thinking more in terms of the interface because I hear your frustrations. I fortunately don't have to do it. But I know that I've heard from plenty of you how cumbersome that process is. And I think that's why I wanted to step back and just say, let's kind of rethink our whole approach here. And maybe there's a way that we can streamline it. Because really, when you're looking at the data, you're determining what your enrollment history has been, and it's whether or not it's viable or needs a re-energized approach, and then what the student impact is. Just those two things, those two domains are what matters in program review.
What wonderful! Thank you for sharing that. I agree with you that it's time to revitalize our process as well, and I'm sure that's something the IPR committee will be working on along with the academic senate and the vice president of instruction and the department chairs for the coming cycle or the coming academic year and overall, and new software as well, with the new Ventive platform that we were able to get a demo of, which is wonderful. Thank you, Jan, for setting that up for us. I want to go back to a couple of things you said. You mentioned EMP as a blueprint, which is really important. And that is something that currently we do reference as part of our, each of the department chairs is encouraged to use that to complete their program review. And that's actually in part of our IPR training in Canvas as well. Another thing you mentioned was the SEM strategic enrollment management, which we actually happen to have Patty here with us today, Golder. And hi, Patty. And she was kind enough to do a training for us a couple weeks ago on that exact topic. And I think a lot of what she said tied in perfectly with your slides today and what you had to say as well. So did you want to speak to that?
Well, I mean, I didn't attend it live. I was able to watch it later. That's really what did inspire me to take this approach because, again, stepping back, seeing how much we've achieved as an institution, and I just think we're ready for that next level. And yeah, I did see that, Patty. So thank you for that inspiration.
Patty, did you want to talk a little more about it? Being as how, we're sort of talking about how it integrates with the data.
Yeah, I just want to tell you that I just, every Tuesday I have a meeting with Martha Mendez, and being the basic skills chair, we're pushing GED program to come back to the college. And so the vision that I have with EMP and SEM, and I work with Ginnie frequently, and I have in the past for years and years and years. And I just see all this coming together, that the EMP that I worked on with her, the SEM that I worked on with her, what I'm doing to hopefully bring new people into the college through many, many venues, lower level and higher level, it all goes together. Once you are not siloed, once you become a person who has worked in many different facets of the college. Yesterday, I was working with two ladies that are outstanding. We were working on the Constitution and the bylaws of the college. And when I see all of this coming together, it's like all of a sudden, there's an explosion in my head that says, we have worked toward a pattern that I have seen for years and years, but I have not been able to pull all of the elements together. And so I just, the IPRC, SLOAC, Academic Senate, the union even, all of that stuff that I work with, and I hear other people and I work with other people. I think that when we look at this as a pattern that's falling into place it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And when all these pieces are put together, that we're going to see we're not just working in one little area of the college, that basically we're working together as a team. And I've always pushed the fact that teamwork is teamwork with people, it's people, it's ideas, all of this put together. I mean, I'm a faculty member, so I see IPRC as extremely important. When I was working with SLOAC last Friday, we were saying, well, when we're pushing the ILO assessment, and I said, well, beyond that, I said, when we go back and we talk about what we're doing with Noventive Improve, Noventive Platform, what this is bringing all of these segments together. The IR will have something to do with it heavily, but we will start with you, Regina, and your group, and it will fall into place. Everybody has a button, and when you push a button and you work on that little button, it's not just that little button. It's many buttons,
right?
Yeah, that will be put together. So I just want to say I'm just energized. I learned something new yesterday. I'm learning something new every day, and that's how I work. So I think if people approach this as, many people working together, many new ideas working together, working toward a path to help simplify for students, which is what Ginnie said. Her goal is students, and that's what I put in the SEM thing when I gave that speech. I said, students are my business. They're the reason I'm here. That's the reason I've taught for 38 years. It's the reason I wanted to become an instructor. Yeah. I came from 13 years of a 4-year to come here because I knew people need help. So we are working as a team to help these students be successful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patty. So many great ideas, and you really highlighted the importance of, you said re-energized. That goes back to exactly what Ginnie was talking about, revitalization. And it's the energy of us all working together, and it creates a synergy that's greater than any one person. And it can sort of become part of our culture, as you mentioned. Also, you mentioned the puzzle pieces. I was thinking the same thing, but I almost think of it in terms of a gear. There's one gear turning, and each time that gear turns, it affects all these other gears, right? And they all have to turn in unison. They have to be synced together. And when you do that, you take a small effect and it can actually be magnified. So that's the value of teamwork and of all these processes. Instead, you mentioned not being a silo. We have IPR process or this process or that process, not being individual, but them working in sync in conjunction with each other. So that's awesome. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I have some questions for Lawrence, so don't go away yet. But does anybody have any questions for Ginnie or Patty about what we discussed so far? Okay. I want to bring up one more thing that you talked about, Ginnie. You did talk about data for equity, how that shows the areas that we still need to work on and the work we have to do, and highlighting the importance of that was really the topic of a talk today, right, with Dr. Lawrence Andriese. So, that is important, but we can't get there if we don't have the data to support it, to show, okay, this is the area that needs the most attention, right? Or these are the students that are most at risk, and the data gets us there by being able to understand it. Also, trends. I think trends are important. You mentioned that too, Ginnie. And, I have sort of a business background, so I'm always looking at those trends. And we can say, okay, this is what it was last year, but what was it the year before that, and before that, and before that? And thankfully, in our data that institutional research provides, it's This year we went back 5 years. So that gave us an even better look at those trends, those global trends. And then for equity, we were able to go back 6 years, right? So we have even more trends that we can look at there, and we can see, are we really improving in this area or with this particular group or with these types of classes or courses, right? So.
Yeah, when it comes to understanding equity and measuring the impact, there's a particular methodology that we use. And on our IER website, there's a primer, a little report there so you can understand what disproportionate impact means and how we evaluate it. Now, that type of analysis is not formally part of our program review process, but it is available for not only the Student Equity Committee, but the Student Equity Dashboard actually just posts performance, but analyzing what that performance means is a little bit more, it levels it up a little bit. There's a little bit more analysis we have to do. And so it's not an indicator or a metric that I would ever encourage us to integrate into program review. But I think it's really critical that people understand what disproportionate impact is, what it means, what the legislature, how the legislature defines it, and then, like I said, how it is we evaluate. When you see a trend in your program where success rates, for example, might be different, males versus females over time, and some changes are occurring, whether or not it's a statistically or practically significant difference,
Right.
kind of important to answer. And so there's a different approach to that. So for program review purposes, I would just indicate that there's something that's of a concern that you might want to evaluate later. But I wouldn't necessarily want to integrate that whole thing into the program review process. I think the program review process is just sort of on a high level, recognize whether or not there are differences that change over time that is of a concern. And then, trigger the IR office or the Student Equity Committee to determine whether or not it's something that the college is actually tracking.
Right. Okay, good. So if we have questions about the data, we can come back to your office and get all those questions answered, right?
Yes, and like I said, I'll just share it with you right now. On the institutional effectiveness homepage, or the dashboard page that you showed everyone,
Sure.
When you click here, there's an additional kind of page for all kinds of reports, student success reports, enrollment management reports. And then based on our Ed Master Plan, you'll see a section on special projects and reports that are around the three main initiatives that we'll be tracking for the next 5 years: Caring Campus, Equity Imperative, and then Execution Excellence, which we don't have anything yet because we're still working on that. But right here is your little primer on disproportionate impact, what it is and why it matters. So you can go to that and kind of just read it and take a look at what these different methodological approaches to evaluating the numbers mean. But that's one of the things that I think is important for the college to increase its knowledge about, is how the state measures disproportionate impact. It isn't enough that there's a difference between Group A and Group B. You have to determine whether or not it's a meaningful difference.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. I don't think I've ever clicked on that link. I have looked around the many resources provided by institutional research, and it's a lot. I mean, it can keep us busy for a couple of days looking at all the data, but it's very intriguing. So I appreciate you providing those and being transparent, making them available to everyone to be able to look at and either get their questions answered or think of new questions that they can, ask you and your team.
So Regina, I think when we do our postmortem for the year, for this cycle in preparation for next year, there is enough crowdsourced wisdom across the campus in these program reviews and in the existing plan that someone could say, here's the pattern I'm seeing. I have, females are underperforming in my course. That we could generate and populate here are some options for strategies in place. You can pick a couple instead of having to come up with your own. I think there's enough data, not only in the existing program reviews, but in the existing blueprints from the EMP, that we could literally enable that kind of a user experience as you're doing your program review next year. And then you can just get right on, joining forces with other people who are working on, for example, marketing and outreach materials, marketing your program. There's a ton of effort across the campus being done there. So why reinvent the wheel? Why not just be able to select, hey, I'm gonna join this group that's putting materials together for their program.
Exactly. And because we have the data, that would allow us to do an even deeper dive if we wanted to or needed to. And this is just me thinking, but we have gender, we have ethnicity, we have age, but maybe we could have a sort of a 3D cross section of all of those to find the students that are at the highest risk of not succeeding and, sort of channel resources to help those particular groups of students.
Exactly.
Anyway, sort of my thoughts, but we have some guests on here today and we'd like to take questions from guests here. If anybody would like to ask Lawrence or Ginny their questions.
Can I make a comment, Regina?
Go right ahead.
So what you and Ginny were just talking about and Lawrence was talking about as far as disproportionate impact, I was noticing that I'm going to go back to basic skills because I dealt with it today and yesterday. I'm writing new curriculum for GED, and I noticed when I did that, this is going to be part of my next session with you. What I noticed was the organization. I went back to my praise report, and I thought, well, if this isn't successful here, where do I have the most people that need the most help? And I saw that high school people that just don't make it in high school need help. And I just found out today from Martha Mendez that there's a connection between high school GED or high school equivalency and getting those people free, no cost into college classes. So I thought if we build that GED program, we've got people that we can move into move into the college. They don't have to pay anything. They can be concurrently enrolled. And we've already got a concurrently enrolled program anyway. This makes sense. So what I did with the praise report allowed me to go back and look at where am I not successful and where can I build success. And so that just gave me an idea. Somebody else, had the idea, and I just thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go for a student population that really needs help. So we're trying to get high school to move into college anyway. Well, this ties two things together, concurrent enrollment with, if they can't make it in high school or get a diploma, let's work with the GED. Let's get them a certificate or a piece of paper that says, we've got a path into college that's actually free that I can take, I can take advantage of right now. So that's what I was doing this afternoon.
I love that. That's a great segue for those students. And some students we'll just call drop out of high school. And it might not be that they can't do the work. It might just be that they're bored, right? Or they're not being challenged, or they don't see it as part of their future. There might be other non-academic reasons. So I love that you're working on creating that bridge for them that can be perhaps more relevant to their future.
Well, there was one other thing that I put in my my praise report, and that had to do with those people, but also it had to do with the fact that we're just not creating academic pathway here. We're creating work. So it works into job, to employment, and that employment, if we work to put people in welding or to put people in fire or AJ or CJ, whatever we call it now, CJ.
Criminal justice.
It's building success, but not just academic. It's building non-academic success. However, those people need to read and they need to write and they need math in order to do welding or
Basic life.
they need chemistry. So eventually we're going to move from people who may not be ready for academics, but if we get them into a job, they'll come back. So we've got a cyclic thing going on here. Our cycle of filtering students through the college for years is feasible.
So basically you're saying a student may come, take some courses that they need, maybe vocational, go out, work for a while, and then may come back later for additional training. Say, 10 years later, they want to be maybe promoted to a manager on their job and they'll come back for those additional skills.
Correct.
Oh, I love that. Okay, any other questions or comments? Jan, Dr. Young, I see we have you on. Dr. Jackie. Okay.
No, I don't have any questions. Sorry about my green screen. It doesn't work with my iPad. But no, it's been very informative. Again, just, amazing amount of expansion on Ginny's part. Her group is just excellent. And Regina, I really appreciate, your direction moreover. So no, I'm good. Thank you. I mean, I have a lot to chew on right now.
Good. Well, my goal was just to take all those commonly asked questions and bring them to one source and get all of our questions answered at once about the data and those types of things. So I think Ginnie and Lawrence, you did a great job for us of not just explaining where we are now, but showing how we can use the data to catapult us into a revitalized future. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Regina. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lawrence.